She was once known for her opulence, jet-setting between Dubai and Paris, owning entire city blocks in London and commanding attention with a single glance. But now, her face is bare, her mansion deserted, and her name erased from society's whispering lips. The woman who once controlled empires now lives cloaked in anonymity, yet this wasn't a fall from grace. It was a calculated vanishing act. Her name was Adara Khalil, a name that once sent tremors through stock exchanges and art auctions alike. A baroness of oil wealth, heir to one of the most powerful dynasties in the Middle East, she had it all. Power, beauty, brilliance. But none of that mattered the moment. She uncovered the truth behind her empire, a truth soaked in betrayal, silence, and blood. Adara's disappearance wasn't reported. No media scandal, no police alerts. One day she was photographed at a gala in Abu Dhabi. The next, she was gone. For 5 years, rumors bloomed like fungus in the dark. Plastic surgery, secret cults, exile, death. But the reality was stranger, darker, and infinitely more dangerous than any tabloid could fathom. Adara had been hunting ghosts, her own. While her family's legacy was built on legitimate oil trade, she discovered classified documents pointing to covert arms deals, money laundering through orphan charities, and even connections to mercenary operations in war zones. Her own father's signature was on contracts that had condemned entire villages to oblivion. This truth shattered her, but it also sharpened her resolve. She realized she had never been free. Her wealth was a golden cage, her lifestyle a mirage constructed from inherited sin. She no longer wanted the empire. She wanted justice. She shed everything, makeup, designer gowns, and even her security detail. Slipping into the margins of society, she became a shadow, following the trails of corruption to its roots. In Afghanistan, she posed as a medic in a war-torn province. In Kenya, she volunteered at a rural orphanage, known to funnel millions from philanthropic donations. She was no longer a baroness. She was a ghost with a mission. During these 5 years, she didn't just collect evidence. She lived inside the wounds of her legacy. Every child she fed, every grave she dug, every woman she comforted in refugee camps was a reminder of what her name had once funded. She was no longer looking for redemption. She was building a case. She worked with rogue hackers, retired spies, and disillusioned ex-diplomats. They called themselves the Forgotten Hand, an underground syndicate sworn to expose the untouchable elite. But even they didn't know her true identity. To them, she was merely Noura, a veiled strategist with fire in her eyes and scars on her back. The deeper she went, the more dangerous the game became. Assassination attempts disguised as accidents, blackmail emails from old acquaintances. The moment she stepped too close to a Saudi financier laundering billions through art auctions in Geneva, a price was put on her head. But Adara didn't flinch. She had abandoned fear along with her title. Her most daring act came when she infiltrated the home of the same man who once arranged her engagement to a European royal for political clout. There, she planted a device that leaked decades of confidential recordings, proof of war crimes, bribery, and treason to international media. The world gasped, governments denied, banks froze. But Adara didn't seek applause. She vanished, again, leaving only a single sentence written on the back of a Swiss newspaper in black ink. "I will not return until the last lie is silenced." Now whispers of her circulate in underground forums. Some call her a criminal, others a savior. But one thing is certain, Adara Khalil is no longer just a billionaire. She is a force, a reckoning, a woman who sacrificed everything to confront the ghosts her empire birthed. And if you believe in truth, justice, and transformation through fire, then type in the comments, "The truth deserves no crown." Let the world know you've heard her story, and you'll never forget it. unlocked it. Before Adara became a ghost, before she tore down empires from the shadows, there was a plan. Not one forged in desperation, but in deliberate silence. This was no mere escape. It was a metamorphosis, a calculated descent into invisibility, where every shred of her old identity would be incinerated to make room for something far more lethal. In the heart of Marrakesh, hidden beneath a tattered scarf and layers of dust, she began her new life. There were no assistants, no luxury cars. She washed dishes in a roadside cafe. She swept floors in a shelter for abused women. She spoke little, observed much. This was her crucible, a test of endurance and humility after years of indulgence. And in those moments of absolute anonymity, she discovered something she never felt in her penthouse suites: clarity. Adara was building her arsenal, not of weapons, but of connections. People society forgot. People like Layla, the trafficked Syrian girl who taught Adara how to move unseen. Or the blind hacker named Qasim, whose fingers could unlock bank vaults and expose offshore accounts with a few keystrokes. These weren't allies, they were her new family, and together they would rewrite the rules of power. Her first target was subtle: a former finance minister in Europe who had embezzled billions from earthquake relief funds meant for Pakistan. While he vacationed in Monaco, his offshore holdings were rerouted, drained and donated anonymously to rebuild the same villages he stole from. News outlets called it a miracle. Adara called it repayment. But the deeper she went, the more monstrous the discoveries. She found proof of child labor factories in Southeast Asia, owned by shell corporations with direct ties to her family, her cousins, her uncles, even her late brother whom she once idolized. That's when she realized this wasn't just about justice, it was about dismantling her bloodline's legacy, not out of hatred, but conviction. If her empire was born in fire, it would end in fire. To move forward, she had to erase every trace of her name. With Qasim's help, she falsified her death, using biometric glitches and a forged medical file leaked to an insider at a Turkish morgue. A body was buried in a private estate in Abu Dhabi. Mourners came, celebrities cried, news anchors eulogized her brilliance. But beneath the earth lay the body of a trafficked woman no one had claimed. And Adara Khalil, the billionaire baroness, officially ceased to exist. What replaced her was Nada, meaning nothing. It was a fitting name. Nada could walk into boardrooms disguised as an interpreter, a waitress, a cleaning lady. She infiltrated the elite not with charm, but with silence. And in that silence, she listened. She learned that the same banks hosting philanthropic galas were laundering funds for paramilitary operations. That humanitarian awards were handed out to men who had signed off on village bombings. That beneath, every polished suit was a skeleton screaming in chains. She began leaking, slowly, strategically, to journalists whose lives had been destroyed by censorship, to prosecutors exiled for their honesty. But every leak came with a message. You don't know who I am, but I know who you are. Fear spread. Suddenly, former allies of her family were moving their families to remote locations. Corporate CEOs started resigning without explanation. One high-profile banker was found hanging in his Berlin flat. A note beside him that simply read, "The silence is louder than the wealth." But Adara didn't stop. In Cambodia, she exposed a hotel chain using child labor through hidden camera footage. In Argentina, she hijacked a media network's live feed to stream footage of a minister's secret torture chamber. Each strike more precise, each message more chilling. Her revenge was not about spectacle, it was about infection. A slow, invisible virus seeping into the veins of corrupt systems, and though her face was never seen, her presence became a ghost. Story whispered among oligarchs. If your wealth is dirty, Nada will find you. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was the shadow. But what haunted Adara most wasn't the danger. It was the memories. The little girl she once was, dancing in marble halls, unaware of the blood funding her ballet lessons. The woman in silk gowns, sipping wine on yachts as bodies piled in deserts far away. That version of her was dead. But sometimes, in the silence, she mourned her. Even ghosts grieve. Still she moved forward, each act of exposure, a prayer for redemption. Each fall of a billionaire, a sacrifice to the truth. And you, watching this, reading this, understand something. Adara's story isn't just about one woman. It's about what happens when truth is buried under gold, when justice is blindfolded by influence, and when one soul decides to fight back with nothing but silence and fire. If you believe the unseen can still burn down empires, write in the comments, "Even silence can scream." Let Adara know her voice, though hidden, has reached you. In every war there are weapons and there are strategies, but the most dangerous wars are those fought without declaration, silent, invisible, orchestrated in backrooms where the only currency is fear. Adara Khalil, or Nada, as she now existed, understood this intimately. She was no longer a baroness. She was an architect of collapse. By the time the world began noticing the mysterious unraveling of elite empires, Adara was already 3 steps ahead. What the public saw as sudden bankruptcies and high-profile suicides were in truth dominoes she had lined up long before. Her vengeance wasn't chaotic. It was a masterpiece. She had learned from the best, the same private intelligence firms her family once employed to destabilize governments. Now those same techniques were weaponized against her own blood. She understood the flow of capital better than any banker, knew how to read facial micro-expressions like a polygraph. She spoke 6 languages fluently, and when she didn't, she listened better than anyone in the room. Her first large-scale operation was called Project Serpent. It targeted a conglomerate that had hidden behind sustainability campaigns, while funneling money to illegal mining in Africa. The twist. This conglomerate had once gifted Adara a private island for her 30th birthday. She remembered the speech her uncle gave, praising her as the future of ethical enterprise. The hypocrisy boiled in her veins. Project Serpent began not with exposure, but with confusion. She leaked forged internal documents implying infighting among the board. Then she impersonated a whistleblower to tip off regulators in 4 countries simultaneously. While the real scandal remained buried, she let the company spend millions investigating a false trail. Then, just as the media moved on, she released the real evidence, videos of child minors, financial ledgers, and secret meetings with paramilitary brokers. The result was nuclear. Stocks crashed, executives fled. The company was banned from trading in 2 continents, but Adara didn't gloat. She moved on, always invisible, always listening. Her next act of sabotage was more personal. Her cousin Tariq, a tech magnate, hailed as the Arab Elon Musk, had built an AI surveillance empire that sold user data to oppressive regimes. He had helped governments imprison activists, some of whom Adara had met in her journey through the shadows. She couldn't let that go unpunished. She infiltrated his company through a janitor's temp agency. Within 3 weeks, she had access to restricted data centers. She didn't destroy them. That would be too obvious. Instead, she implanted a hidden algorithm, a self-replicating digital parasite that slowly corrupted data without immediate detection. Months later, Tariq's AI made a critical error during a live demonstration, falsely identifying a government minister as a terrorist. The fallout was instant. Contracts were terminated. His board ousted him. His name was no longer revered. It was a joke whispered in Silicon Valley. Adara had turned wealth itself into a weapon, not by stealing it, but by dismantling its illusion of invincibility. But she wasn't alone anymore. The forgotten hand had grown. Former Black Ops agents, betrayed whistleblowers, idealistic coders, they all answered to Nada, and none of them knew her real face. They coordinated across time zones using encrypted networks and dead drops, in abandoned temples, closed subway stations, and even luxury hotels they'd hacked into for temporary headquarters. One night they were ghosts in Bangkok, the next, whispers in Madrid. Their most ambitious plan yet was to target the Khalil Foundation itself, the pride of her family and a public symbol of their charitable heart. For decades, the foundation had been untouchable, hiding behind photo ops with starving children and glossy brochures of schools built in deserts. But Adara knew the truth. Only 12% of its funds reached the intended recipients. The rest vanished into shell companies. She planned to expose it not through outrage, but irony. Using deep fakes, she created a viral video of her deceased father confessing everything. "We built our empire on bones," the video said as his eerily lifelike face blinked and trembled. The world erupted. Memes flooded the internet. Journalists dove into archived financials. Real survivors came forward with stories of bribes, theft, and exploitation. The foundation collapsed within weeks. Its board resigned. The Khalil name was no longer golden. It was radioactive. And still, Adara remained in the shadows. Her art was not just destruction. It was transformation. She understood that burning down a palace was meaningless unless you built something from the ashes. In Guatemala, she anonymously funded a school using cryptocurrency transfers. In Syria, she purchased land for war widows. In Detroit, she financed clean water infrastructure under the pseudonym No One. She had become a myth with a motive. Some called her a digital Robin Hood. Others swore she was part of a new terrorist group. But the truth was simpler. She was a woman who had seen behind the curtain and refused to pretend anymore. And so she keeps walking, face covered, name erased, footsteps light. But with every fall of a tyrant, her legend grows. If you believe. Justice has no face, type in the comments. Power is nothing without truth. Let the faceless know they are not alone. The past doesn't die, it waits. Sometimes it lingers in a photograph, sometimes in a forgotten scent. But for Adara Khalil, reborn as the faceless phantom known only as Nada, the past wasn't memory. It was a predator, and it had found her. She had spent years dismantling the very empire that once crowned her with gold and reverence. She had erased her identity, scorched the roots of her name, and lived as a shadow among the forgotten. But no amount of exile or vengeance could unmake the blood that flowed in her veins. The call came not through a phone, but through presence, unmistakable, chilling. It happened in Tbilisi, Georgia, in a cramped apartment where rainwater leaked through the cracked windows and the electricity flickered like the heartbeat of a dying world. There he stood, Zaid Khalil, her brother, declared dead years ago in a private jet crash. A man she once wept for, once prayed for, but the man before her was not the boy she knew. This Zaid was forged in steel and silence, his eyes colder than the marble palaces they once played in. "You think this is justice?" he said, stepping into the flickering light. "You're burning the legacy of 1,000 years for what? To play ghost with your shame?" Adara didn't flinch. She stared back at the man her family had molded into their sword. Zaid had always been the hidden hand of the Khalil dynasty, while she was the polished face. He was the executor behind the curtain, the fixer, the silencer, the heir of shadows. And now he had come not to reason, but to hunt. He offered her a deal. Cease the sabotage, kill the leaks, disband her network. In return, he would guarantee the safety of the few innocents left. Distant relatives, friends from their past lives, names he whispered like threats. But Adara refused, because in Zaid, she saw the version of herself she could have become, a weapon for the wicked, a loyal dog to a crumbling throne. That night, something shifted. She was no longer a rogue. She was a traitor marked for elimination. And the enemy was no longer faceless. It had her brother's eyes and her father's ruthlessness. To protect her people, Qasim, Layla, the remnants of the forgotten hand, she scattered them. No more shared networks, no more open lines. They returned to the old ways: burner phones, coded messages on dusty radio frequencies, dead drops under temple ruins, and meetups disguised as religious pilgrimages. But Zaid was already inside her world. Layla vanished in Berlin. Her last message, a 2-second voice note with no words, just breathing. Her body was never found. Qasim survived a sniper attack in Malaysia, but lost the use of his legs. Another agent, a woman named Rina, was captured while transporting a ledger that implicated multiple royal families in crimes against humanity. She was tortured and executed, her body dumped outside a United Nations building with her tongue cut out. The message was unmistakable: "You're losing, slowly." But Adara didn't break. She adapted. She knew brute force would not win this war. So she turned to something more unpredictable: code. A phantom ally, known only as Obsidian, a reclusive genius who lived somewhere in the Arctic Circle, helped her develop the most dangerous AI she had ever encountered: Hydra. It was not designed to predict the stock market or decrypt codes. It was built to predict corruption. Hydra fed on the digital crumbs of the elite: emails, financial transactions, surveillance footage, speech inflections, metadata from leaked diplomatic cables. It learned how power moved. It mapped the pulse of corruption. Like a disease, soon, Adara wasn't just reacting. She was intervening before atrocities happened. Hydra warned her of a child trafficking deal hours before the children were transported. It revealed plans for an illegal arms shipment disguised as medical aid. Each time she struck preemptively, quietly, surgically. But even Hydra had limitations. It couldn't anticipate vengeance. Zaid wasn't interested in power anymore. He was interested in erasure. Her erasure. He started sacrificing his own allies, executives, diplomats, generals, anyone who could be suspected of collaborating with her, real or imagined, was eliminated publicly. One was burned alive in a luxury car, another thrown from a hotel balcony in Seoul. And each time a message was left behind in red letters: "We cleanse our own." The war was no longer ideological, it was ancestral. She realized then this wasn't just about wealth or justice, it was about blood, about rewriting the very code of her lineage. Adara had chosen to burn her crown in order to reclaim her soul. Zaid had chosen to bury his soul to protect the crown, and so Hydra became not just a tool, but a mirror. It showed her where power would rise, but also where grief had nested. Her own mind became part of the algorithm, predicting not just danger, but memory. She began to see her own past as coordinates in a war map. The orphanage she once funded, now a front for child soldiers. The gala she once hosted, a memory cloaking a massacre financed by her family's trust. She saw herself not as a savior, but as a ghost cleaning up a massacre she helped fund with silk gloves and champagne. And still, she moved forward. Because this war, her war, was not meant to be won. It was meant to be fought. As long as her breath lingered in the dark, the Hydra would pulse, the leaks would flow, and Zaid would know the crown may rise again, but it would always sit on ashes. If you believe bloodlines don't define who we become, write in the comments, "Legacy ends where truth begins." Stand with her. Show that the crown cannot silence the fire. There is a moment in every revolution when the enemy stops being external, when the battle shifts from destroying the system to surviving yourself. Adara had reached that moment. years into her crusade against the legacy she once wore like a second skin. She realized that the deeper she dove into corruption, the more her own reflection began to fracture. Her war was no longer against banks, governments, or bloodlines. It was against the slow erosion of self. Because in the world of shadows, you wear masks not just to deceive others, but to remember who you are. Adara had become a master of roles. In Zurich, she posed as a corporate auditor to infiltrate a shell company funneling money into private militias. In Casablanca, she played the grieving widow of a philanthropist to gain access to a vault containing hard drives of blackmail footage. She was a mute servant in Hong Kong, a professor of cultural ethics in Copenhagen, a midwife in Aleppo, each identity flawlessly executed, each mask fused with her skin, but every time she removed one, she wondered if anything real remained underneath. She had no home, no photos, no fingerprints, no memories untouched by blood. Even her voice, once soft, musical, known to lull boardrooms into obedience, was now quiet, utilitarian, used only when absolutely necessary. The woman who once graced magazine covers was now invisible by design, and it was beginning to consume her, yet she could not stop. Because the Hydra had spoken again. This time, it uncovered something older, deeper. A subterranean network of archives hidden across 4 continents, data so explosive that even the world's most powerful intelligence agencies had failed to locate them. These weren't just financial records, they were confessions, digital autopsies of history's worst sins, preserved by the very hands that committed them, and they were all connected to her family's vault, Vault 314. It had been a myth whispered by ex-spies and rogue journalists, a database built by a secret consortium of billionaires and warlords designed to store their exit insurance, blackmail against each other in case one turned against the group. Video confessions, DNA evidence, coordinates of mass graves, every crime too dark for public consumption. Her father had always denied its existence. But Hydra found patterns, transactions, access codes buried inside offshore casino servers. A frequency, a sound code embedded in a symphony that was once played at her own 18th birthday gala. Vault 314 was real. To reach it, Adara would need help. But the kind of help that came with a cost: betrayal. She reached out to Salim Khan, a former ally turned enemy turned myth. Once her lover, now a mercenary for the highest bidder. He had every reason to kill her. She had exposed his smuggling operations in Romania 3 years prior, ruining his empire. But he agreed to a meeting, not for money, but for closure. They met in a cathedral that had long since lost its faith. Stained glass shattered, pews covered in moss, silence thick like fog. Salim walked in wearing black, a silver pistol holstered under his coat. He stared at her like a ghost from a story he'd tried to forget. "I should end you," he said. "But you won't," she replied. "Because what's inside that vault could burn everyone who ever owned us." He didn't ask for details. He just handed her a phone, a number, a name. The next phase began. Adara and Salim traveled under false identities across abandoned Cold War tunnels, negotiating with data brokers who spoke in riddles and numbers. One was a monk who lived atop a ruined temple in Tibet, offering encrypted coordinates in exchange for a promise that she would expose the men who funded wars through religious charities. Another contact was a child, a prodigy locked in a mental institution in Sweden, who communicated only through chess games. Every move he made translated into a line of code. By the end of the match, Adara held the key to Vault 314's mainframe, but Zaid was close, closer than ever. He had learned of her pursuit, and unlike her, he didn't seek the vault to reveal the truth, but to erase it forever. It became a race against silence. The closer she got to the vault, the more Hydra flickered, its predictions growing unstable, as if the weight of what was coming broke the machine's logic. Her allies began to question the mission. Some defected, others tried to kill her. Hydra itself was targeted by a worm, a virus that threatened to erase years of intelligence. Someone inside had turned. The labyrinth of masks was collapsing, and Adara, she was more alone than ever. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself back in her childhood villa, watching fireworks explode over the desert sky, her father lifting her into the air saying, "One day, you'll change the world." And now she was doing exactly that, by turning it inside out. But what if, in chasing justice, she had become something unrecognizable? What if the woman behind all these masks had ceased to exist? Still, she moved forward, toward Vault 314, toward truth, because even if she burned with it, the world deserved to know. And you, watching from your screen, remember this. Sometimes the face of evil is not monstrous. It is familiar. Sometimes justice wears the same smile as tyranny. And sometimes the most dangerous masks are the ones we wear to survive. If you believe that even the most broken identities can reveal unbreakable truths, write in the comments. Every mask hides a story. Let the world know you're still watching and listening. In the world Adara once ruled, secrets were currency. But Vault 314 was more than a vault. It was the spine of a shadow empire, an ossuary of sins committed behind diplomatic immunity and billion-dollar facades. It wasn't just where power hid its shame. It was where it stored its leverage. Reaching it wasn't a matter of hacking or infiltration. It was a test of descent into the very structure of corruption that she had spent years dismantling. And the closer she got, the more the lines between destroyer and descendant blurred. Vault 314 was located not in a government building or digital cloud, but in a forgotten data fortress beneath an abandoned NATO base in northern Greenland. Temperatures fell below 40 degrees Celsius. Winds screamed like ghosts. The facility had been decommissioned decades ago, repurposed by the very elites it once protected. Now it was a cathedral of control, frozen, buried, and armed with countermeasures designed to outlast civilization. Adara arrived in silence, guided by coordinates decrypted from the monk's data glyphs and the child prodigy's chess codes. She brought no weapons, just Hydra on a secure drive, and the will to end something ancient. Salim was already waiting. "You still believe truth is worth dying for?" he asked as they stood before a sealed door etched with the phrase, "Veritas non moritur." Truth does not die. She didn't respond. Her eyes did. The vault's interface required not just access codes, but a biometric convergence, a DNA signature from someone within the Khalil bloodline. Adara had foreseen this. Before she left Istanbul, she had retrieved a relic from her mother's private chapel, an heirloom locket containing hair strands from her own childhood. A cruel irony that the same genes used to build this empire would now be used to bring it down. The vault opened. What lay inside was a mausoleum of horrors. Rows upon rows of digital tapes, documents, live feed archives, and old-world ledger books, each labeled by a single identifier: guilt. Not just financial records, but footage of meetings where genocides were plotted. Audio files of politicians selling wars for contracts. Scanned letters in trembling handwriting. Confessions from leaders who had disappeared without a trace. Adara moved slowly, her fingers brushing centuries of darkness. One file caught her eye. It was labeled Khalil Agreement, 1989. She opened it. Her father's voice, young, precise, echoed through the cold chamber. He was negotiating arms deals during a famine, offering weapons in exchange for mining rights in territories meant to be protected by the United Nations. But the worst part wasn't the deal itself. It was the ending. This isn't theft. Her father said, "It's preservation. If we don't do it, someone else will. At least our children will live like gods." That sentence froze her more than the Arctic winds ever could. He had never seen it as evil. He saw it as inheritance, as legacy. Adara fell to her knees. All this time, she had believed she was rebelling against a broken empire, but she had been bred for it, designed within it. Her rage had always been personal, but the truth was systemic. Vault 314 wasn't a treasure trove of evidence. It was a mirror, Hydra activated. It began cataloging, sorting, prioritizing by global impact, reach, and likelihood of suppression. It flagged 327 files for immediate release. But Adara hesitated, not because she doubted their validity, but because she saw herself in every atrocity. How many had died while she attended galas? How many were sold while she signed charity checks? Releasing these files would destroy hundreds of lives, maybe thousands, not just tyrants, but families, children, collateral damage. And in those moments of silence, the ghost of Zaid spoke again, inside her mind. "Are you cleansing the world, or finishing our father's work in reverse?" Then came the alert. Hydra detected incoming forces. Zaid had found her, the Arctic fortress lit up in red. Doors slammed shut. Power flickered. Adara grabbed the hard drive. Salim drew his weapon. "They're here," he said. "We have 10 minutes, maybe less." Adara had one choice: upload the truth or escape with it, but she knew the truth was not safe in her hands anymore. It had to be unleashed. She connected Hydra to the old satellite uplink embedded in the vault's ceiling, a technology long forgotten, analog, untraceable. The upload began. Hydra pulsed, file after file shot into servers across the globe. WikiLeaks clones, journalists' inboxes, anonymous data forums, civilian cloud storages. It was out. Unstoppable. By the time the first shot rang out, Adara was already burning the physical archives. Flames danced around her like spirits released from captivity. Zaid's men breached the chamber, but Adara wasn't there. She had vanished again, leaving behind only a symbol scorched into the metal floor. A hand with no face, the forgotten hand. By the next morning, news outlets were flooded. Governments collapsed, CEOs fled, mass resignations, emergency conferences. Truth, long buried, now roared like an avalanche. But no one knew who had done it. Some claimed it was an ex-agent. Others said it was a rogue AI. A few whispered about a woman who walked through fire without a face. But we know. And if you believe the truth is a weapon more powerful than any crown, write in the comments. Truth doesn't need a name, because now it's yours. When Vault 314 fell, so did the silence that cloaked the world's elite. But Adara Khalil didn't rise from its ashes to reclaim her name. She didn't surface to take credit, offer interviews, or accept global awards. No foundation bore her monogram. No statue was erected in her honor. Her reward was simpler, darker, and far more dangerous. She became myth. In Tokyo, protesters waved banners with her symbol, the Forgotten Hand, during a financial scandal that toppled 3 major banks. In Rio, teenagers hacked government websites and signed their defacements as Nada. In Lagos, murals appeared overnight on bullet-riddled walls, showing a faceless woman standing in front of burning skyscrapers with the words, "She saw, she fought, she vanished." But Adara wasn't watching from a throne. She was running because Zaid had survived, and now he was no longer acting in secrecy. The Khalil remnants had repositioned themselves not as royalty, but as salvation. They formed a paramilitary force, known publicly as the Phoenix Commission, claiming to protect global order from data terrorism. But their real objective was simple: erase the consequences of Vault 314. They began with assassinations. The journalist in Berlin who first published the leaked audio was poisoned. A human rights lawyer in Jakarta was killed in a staged car crash. In Kenya, an orphanage Adara had quietly funded was burned to the ground. Zaid wasn't sending messages anymore. He was sending war, Hydra. Still alive in fragments across scattered servers, sent Adara a warning. High-risk target identified, Operation Black Mirror. The plan: discredit the Vault 314 leaks by faking a mass cyber attack and framing it on an extremist group. The Phoenix Commission would intervene, the data would be declared forged, and world powers would return to the status quo. This couldn't be allowed. Adara, still operating in fragments of herself, moved to intercept. Her path led her to Seoul, where the core node of the Phoenix servers was hosted under a philanthropic front. There she reconnected with one of her oldest allies, Imani, a former intelligence officer who had once saved Adara's life during a failed extraction in Libya. Imani had since gone underground, raising her child in exile. But the moment she saw Adara, her eyes hardened, not with fear but with purpose. "You're late," she said, handing Adara a flash drive. "They've already activated it. You have 48 hours. Adara moved like a phantom. No name, no passport, just purpose. She weaved through Seoul's labyrinth of neon and surveillance, bypassing thermal sensors, voice print security, and predictive patrol drones. Every step was a gamble, every breath a countdown. Inside the core node facility, she encountered something unexpected. Not resistance, but memory. The building was designed by the same architect who built her childhood estate. Every curve of the hallway whispered fragments of a life she had buried. In the server room, she found the program, Project Black Mirror. It wasn't just a cover-up. It was a kill switch, an AI designed to rewrite history by injecting false data into credible sources. If activated, Vault 314's evidence would vanish behind fabricated noise, fake massacres, synthetic corruption files, simulated scandals too outlandish to believe. Real data would drown in the absurd. Adara didn't hesitate. She initiated a counter-sequence. Hydra surged from her flash drive, clashing with Black Mirror in digital warfare. Code erupted like lightning, firewalls melted, protocols collided. The room trembled as if it too feared the outcome. But Hydra was older, smarter. Born not in labs but in loss, betrayal, and righteous fury. It won. Black Mirror disintegrated, but not before sending one last signal. Zaid now knew exactly where she was. Adara fled into Seoul's underbelly, wounded, bleeding, her vision blurring. She was losing strength, not from gunfire, but from years of battle with no end, no home, no forgiveness. She collapsed in a tunnel beneath a Buddhist temple, the echo of prayer bells above her merging with her fading pulse. And then, something unexpected. She was found, not by mercenaries, not by drones, but by children, runaways, lost boys and girls hiding from systems that had forgotten them. They recognized her, not her face, but her presence. They had seen the murals, heard the stories. She wasn't a stranger. She was a legend walking among them. They carried her, nursed her, protected her. And for the first time in years, Adara slept. When she woke, one of the children, a girl named Hana, looked at her and said, "You saved the world. But who saves you?" Adara didn't answer because she didn't know. But in that silence, something shifted. The revolution wasn't just hers anymore. It had outgrown her. It lived in whispers, in symbols, in strangers. She didn't need to be seen. She needed only to ensure it never stopped. If you believe that legends don't need crowns to lead, type in the comments. The faceless never fall. Let her know her fight is not forgotten. Hydra had spread the truth like fire across every border, every screen, every empire that ever thought it was untouchable. Vault 314 was no longer a myth, it was revelation. And just when the world expected to see her fall in flames, something Happened, Adara Khalil disappeared. No body, no blood, no explosion, no grave, only a trace of footsteps in the snow leading into the wind. And then, nothing. The Phoenix Commission stormed the facility, expecting to find her lifeless. Instead, they found the servers empty, burned and scrubbed with a signature line left behind in the metadata of the final file. I was never yours to hunt. N. Some say she escaped through an underwater exit carved beneath the Antarctic glacier. Others believe she was airlifted by a rogue resistance drone network. One report claimed a female monk walked into a village in the Himalayas days later, carrying a worn flash drive around her neck, and vanished by morning. But no one could prove anything, because Adara was never meant to be a martyr. She was meant to be a myth that breathes. And as her digital revolution detonated across the globe, the symbols began to return. Spray-painted on embassy walls, etched into the backs of laptops, projected onto skyscrapers during protests. The faceless hand, the mistress of fire, the woman who gave up power not to hide, but to set it free. She had become something far more dangerous than a billionaire rebel or a ghost operative. She had become an idea. She had become the end of silence. In the following months, thousands of women-led coalitions emerged under the name Mistress Empire, networks built on encrypted trust, strategy, and action. Not activists, not influencers, architects of new power, anonymous, precise, unstoppable. Their motto? No mercy for those who bury truth. And in quiet corners of the world, people still say, if you ever see a woman with dirt under her nails, fire in her eyes, and silence in her step, don't follow her, because she's already behind you.